Thanks very much, Will. Back one. Um, to me, if you have to call something a community, it's already in trouble. A community centre doesn't sound like a place to me. A residential community is probably not a place many of us would want to live. I think most of us like living in places where we engage with other people. There was this sort of fantasy 20, 30 years ago that with the internet, which I think in many ways destroys all our personal freedoms, and we're attacked by correspondence and information all times of day and night, liberating that seemed, but it's actually quite stressful. But what's interesting is people still want to gather together in streets, squares, and buildings to meet other people, either in a planned way or in a chance way. And one of the great things about any piece of city or urbanity or town or village is the idea of the chance and the unknown and the uncertainty in delight. I'm going to talk for 10 minutes about how I think that attitude to the socializing nature of buildings and the role of buildings in the city, and then talk a little bit about a few projects we're doing that demonstrate our interpretation of it. So for me, I don't believe in, central business districts. I don't believe in residential districts. I believe in pieces of city where people of all ages gather together. None of us want to be in ghettos. So as an architect, I think, much as people love the great landmark projects for their own egos, and I had a black cab down here and the driver was talking about loving this building and hating that building, and that kind of engagement is great. But actually, we live, work and play in ordinary places, which our job as designers is to help make what I would call extraordinary, as in the ordinary can tend down to the bland. How do you make something that is everyday, workmanlike, and yet at the same time, without controlling or guiding people, bring some surprise, some pleasure, and some delight to their life? For us as an office, it began with a bus station. The brief was 14 islands for a bus station. Our view was, let's make a new it was then the 20th century, a 20th century building for the 21st century, a bus station that's actually more like a town square, a public room. Here's an office, the original version of what we now call the white collar factory, and the idea of it as a social space. A school, and the idea that the school is a social space. When we make cities, and we do all make pieces of cities or buildings that fit into cities, if you look at any historical master plan of a great city like London, you will find streets, vistas, avenues, squares, and buildings called churches that were the community centres of their day, which actually focused the eye, focused the mind, and hopefully, for the congregation, focused the spirit. We don't make those buildings anymore. We live in a different era. So in many ways, schools are a focus for community, and in that sense, incredibly important when making a new place or repairing a place. Healthcare, doctors' facilities, and the emerging idea of breaking up the horrific clinical-driven infrastructure of large hospitals and actually forming smaller units. I was a judge on what turns out to be Roger Stirk Harbour's winning cancer hospital, and I said, I don't know anything about hospitals, and the client said, no, that's the whole idea. We want someone who knows nothing about hospitals. We don't want to make a hospital, we want to make a really good building. And, this was guys, if we're getting our research right, we won't want cancer hospitals because we'll have dealt with cancer. So we want a really good building that will deal with cancer now and deal with something we don't yet know about into the future. And for us, that goes all the way through to thinking about the staircase. And there's this kind of terrible term, the 1% for art, but it was a good idea. The idea of actually embedding kind of experience into our buildings. So for us, if we're interested in universal use, which isn't anonymous black box construction, but it's the idea that any good building, I remember one architect referred to it as the 3 Fs for architecture: finish, photo, and fuck off. The idea being that when people build, we talk about the project's finished. Actually, the project hasn't finished, it's actually just begun. There's going to be a whole life we know nothing about, which we're not involved in, which may be a good thing that we're not involved in. But if you recognize that fact, then you get upset later on because someone's put the curtains in the wrong place or moved in the wrong furniture, then you're designing the wrong kind of buildings and you'll design the wrong kind of cities. Really good buildings flex in response to their users, and they give their users something to guide them, they help them. So to us, universal use, this is the T building. This is a bacon factory, a storage building. It's now an art gallery, a club, an advertising agency, 40 offices and 4 bars. The original architects weren't thinking about that, but they built a generous, elegant building. This is in America. This was built in 2015, but the original building was for the client, an oil billionaire. We turned it into a sports centre for his community. That's the community of people who work for him. But it was actually going to be a private building, which he reversed out if he was embarrassed. I said to him, well, what was it for, the original frame that we found and the original storage? He said, it was for my personal wine collection. He said, but I realised it was a vanity project. I said, well, how many bottles was it? He said, 100,000. I said, that sounds like quite a lot. He said, I know. He goes, no one needs more than 15,000. So there you are. That's the maximum. This is the white collar factory. It's an office. It's for a REIT. They do offices, Derwent, London. But actually, the conversation has been about making a robust building that's simple and flexible, naturally ventilated, and that will change use. Same for these buildings. This is the idea of the community of users in a building, making what we call the landlord's roof terrace. So wherever you are in a building, there's a space you can escape to. So for us, in designing buildings and pieces of cities, it's about a tension between the specific and the generic. If we don't know what a building is going to be in the future, or we know for sure the brief we've got now is going to change in use, then how do we design? And to us, it's about being very, very specific about certain things. How that building makes an address, how you move people through that building, how you organize the flow of people. But then there are other generic and looser spaces. That's why the industrial buildings of another era can cope with the use of now, because their buildings actually have personality and character. So a flexible building that has nothing to offer us will soon be demolished. A flexible building that has space, light, volume, promenade, generosity will move through the future. So, I mean, this is the Saatchi Gallery. It was originally conceived as an orphanage, then a school, then a territorial army centre, and when we got hold of it, it was about to be turned into an office. So what's good about that building is its ability to flex. Of course, when you work for certain clients, you know you can't control the future, you know you might not want to control the future, but if it's the National Health Service, if you don't do something to control them, they will make it a miserable future for anyone who visits. So this is a childcare centre where we took the idea of art into an extreme kind of inhabitation of the space as a way of controlling the kind of inevitable creep of institutionalized living. This is the kind of ultimate idea of work in the future. As I said, I think we work too long and too hard, and this is the kind of vision of work in the future where you nip up and have a swim. This is the Shoreditch house above the T building. This is a church converted into an office. This is a church converted into a theatre group, converted into an art gallery. So ordinary buildings need to be extraordinary, and we are dealing, when we design the buildings of the future and the cities of the future, the everyday. And wherever we're designing, we're actually building upon the past. This is a mixed-use building in Hackney. Hackney is an area of dramatic change. It is being recycled. And the best thing you can do with Hackney is to dig through the history and find out not only what's happening in the future, but what's gone on in the past. The past will always give you clues to the future. This is a building where we work with an office developer to make housing. It's Adelaide Wharf. It's the only kind of private, social and intermediate where they're all sharing the same space, the same courtyard, the same amenities. And what was interesting is the client knew nothing about residential, and therefore they came to it with an open mind and challenged all the existing models. So it's about, in my view, beware of specialization. This is America, where they will smash a city apart with white flight and urban motorways. This is Oklahoma. I heard someone talking about active design earlier. There's 3 or 4 bars in this building. There's 250 flats for rent. There's a car park for 600 cars. No one in Oklahoma will eat a meal in a restaurant unless they're within 10 yards of the front door. It's a very, very different culture to ours. We have much to learn from them in terms of certain attitudes they have. They don't stay in a place, they reinvent it. There isn't the same emotional attachment to the city, and yet there's an extraordinary sense of responsibility as a client to leave your city better than you found it. The old Athenian oath is actually kind of, in small town mid-America, it's actually very, very important. This city was only founded in 1898, so in many ways it's a new city. This is Kenya, where we're working with a former student on a mixed-use development of offices and living. So we hear a lot about politics in architecture. Again, you know, there's a big debate going on with the mayors. A special kind of advisor sent me a note saying, have you read their policies? It's all very interesting, not that different. And whoever gets in office, by the time the mandarins get hold of them, they'll all become very much the same. Which is a kind of slightly damning thing, but it's a kind of interesting critique about permanence in the urban fabric, politics popping up every 3 years in an electoral moment or a moment of crisis to make a series of claims. Everyone's saying London needs 50,000 or 100,000 homes. Where are they going to provide them? Well, in the world of new residential development, as the director of the Architecture Foundation said in his interview, to him it's about a project he's calling Donut. It's not about the City of London or the City of Westminster or probably even Camden. It's about the 29 to 30 other boroughs around, places like Newham. Newham has land, London's moving east. I'm very much against what they used to call sustainable new communities, because to me, all 3 words are coming together. You know it's going to be an absolute car crash. But I do think there's a really important opportunity as we move east, as industrialized land changes, to build communities around historical communities. Silvertown Quays is a new community of 5,000 homes and 3 million square foot of offices. But actually, it's got an amazing history, that place. Docks, change, flour, distribution warehouse, telegram lines to America. Those are the things when you're building new communities that you need to build upon. And importantly and interestingly, in these new developments, generally in the east as London moves east, is they are not about residential, they are about pieces of city. And pieces of city require infrastructure to connect them. They require people to live, work and play there. They need schools, they need bars, we talk a lot about the use class orders, that we also need to deal with misuse. We don't want to live in sanitized cities. So how do you bring those things together? In my view, you set up structures. They'll take 20 years to build. Whoever's commissioning there now won't be around. What Argent got right at King's Cross was they actually, and we worked on various stages of that project and still are, they actually said, this is a place, it's going to change, the streets are permanent. So in my view, it's about recognizing if the streets are permanent, the buildings are actually, despite the fact we like them very much, are actually temporary. They do come and go over 20, 30, 40, 50, 80-year time spans. Streets are incredibly constant, and that's what you build your community around, streets and places and experiences that you can then help to set up through the way you design and master plan. And that same logic should be taken into your buildings. If buildings are microcosms of cities, then you don't make a building where you hit the lift straight away and move through it and then get to an anonymous corridors. You make a building where the promenade, the journey, is a street through that building. And that is a very specific and memorable street that might pick up a roof garden, a terrace, a balcony, a view, around which, why can't we put retail and offices and housing? Are they that different? We don't make industrial products in a very heavy-duty way now, and actually people could work and live, and indeed you could put schools in these buildings. So we need to make buildings with a memorable characteristic like our streets, and we need to make communities that recognize that the uses will change. We cannot dictate what the uses will be. It's the fallacy of planning to kind of say that's a B1, C2, D3 building. It's absolutely absurd. It's either a good or bad building, it has a good or bad relationship with the city, and it has a memorable characteristic, or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, it will fail. That is guaranteed. Regent Street, a place where we're working with the Crown. It's kind of funny, I've never believed in facade retention, but if you're going to do it, Regent Street is the place to do it, because they only built facades. They built facades down the streets, they built sheds out the back, and they built very, very thin little buildings behind. So the facades were constant, like in Bath, and what happened behind was a reflection of the time. It's quite an interesting take on Archigram's idea of stage sets. This is what I would call a city sandwich, 3 floors of retail, 2 floors of offices, 2 floors of apartments, and the apartments go through the same staircase and lift as the office users. Is that a big problem? No, and if it isn't, then you can create buildings that will flex and that will respond to the changing needs of society that we can't dictate. Sometimes in a place like Greenwich, even the everyday building of housing needs to have a kind of monumental quality, because you need to build up a sense of place. You won't get place from use, you will get it from people. And for people to come, they need to associate with space and buildings. So to build the best pieces of city, ideally, you don't build new cities, you build on the cities that exist. And they do get denser and they do get taller. You make city rooms. This is Barking, where we built a library, school, housing, flats. This is a new building on an industrial site in Camden that is incubators to keep students in London, that is flats, that is student housing, and that is workspace. This is Casper, which is about affordable housing. This is the Angel. This is about an office with 4 times the normal area in the reception, because the idea is the reception isn't a reception to an office, it's a public room for the city. And if you put that into a building, the building actually generates a kind of engagement with the community of users around. So all these buildings are using and recycling buildings in different ways over time, or they're making new buildings that we know will be recycled by others. Buckminster Fuller talked about how you might rethink Manhattan. The great, what a place we are now today. Ecobuild, this extraordinary event, this gathering. We are obsessed now with making these kind of super insulated, smart and clever buildings. I think we're topping out with our buildings now. I don't think we're going to get any greater return in energy efficiency of them. I was brought up in the era when nuclear fuel was something people marched against us, that was going to kill us. Now, 30 years on, I'm being told it's a savior of the modern world. And that's kind of interesting. Is that fashion? Is that the fact that we've forgotten the old worries about nuclear fuel? A benefit is if you have clean energy, it becomes abundant, you're back to the 60s again, and you don't make these super insulated buildings we're making now. There are 2 ways we're going in buildings and in cities. One is what we call caves. These are thermally massive, simple buildings that you naturally ventilate. The person, not the building system, but the person interacts with the building. Or we're going to smart cities where they know where you are because of your smartphone. They know where you're going. They know where to supply you air. Traffic lights don't work if there are no cars. Air doesn't come to a room unless people are there. In one sense, that could be a magical solution. It could also be a sort of Jacques Tati-like technological meltdown. So our current obsession with technology, I think, is something that we are reacting against in the making of places. And I see that in Brooklyn, where everyone makes their own bread and knits their own jumpers. There's a changing engagement with the artisanal. The kind of fetishization of technology is something to be kind of wary of, whilst not denying it. We're all engaged with it. And those are the things we need to think about when we make the cities of the future. We are constructing ideas. This is a Cold War city we're building with Nigel Huger on a Cold War site. But we are constructing ideas that play between the generic and the specific, the ready-made and the bespoke. I believe we should be building upon the places we live in. We should recognize that the public promenade is crucial, that actually our buildings will flex over time and they are mirrors of our cities. And for us, this represents itself, this is a project in Amsterdam, it represents itself with this idea about, as Cedric Price said, it's not about designing bridges, it's about working out how best to get to the other side. We're not designing communities, we're designing spaces and places for communities to take of and own themselves, and for those communities to allow them to evolve over time, not to tell them how to live, but to give them clues. So this is the BBC TV, where with 3 or 4 other architects, we're master planning and creating a building that recycles the BBC into studios, flats, a school, workshop, and a university. This is art in a mixed-use building. It's really important that you don't just turn this idea of the ready-made into something without any personality. This is the idea of a kind of a garden office. This is the idea of the kind of small spaces between a canal and a new mixed-use place. This is in central London, carving homes out of misused buildings. This is in America, the idea of place. And acceptance in America that the car exists. We have a confusion in London. Everyone seems to own a car, but no one designs buildings or cities for them. We may have too many, we may have to change that, but they're going to be around. They're going to get cleaner and they're going to get quieter. They're not going to disappear. This is the idea of, if you are making a new place, then you can't wait for it to finish at the end because it'd be great one day. You have to kind of manage its construction. So if it's a 15-year make, you have to make pop-up parks, events and places, because it will be great one day, but whilst you're getting to that one day, who are the urban pioneers who are going to live in the first housing block, the first mixed-use block, or go to the first school in an acre of brownfield land? So it's about having a table, a club table of engaging with people, talking, not doing what they want because they're not necessarily the audience, but talking and learning about how people feel about new development. This is about the old and the new coming together. This is about mixing uses. There's been a tremendous financial model. So we think we're designers, but money in London dictates that you make slabs of offices, slabs of education, and slabs of living. And we live in a party wall city, although we don't have the Fire of London problems anymore. And that financial investment does more to dictate what we do than anything else. So if you want to make a better future, you need to challenge the way we pay for and finance modelling. If you want to make affordable homes for the future, you need to think of smarter ways of financing where the first buyer doesn't take all the equity out and it's denied future generations. That's one of the great problems of London. It's been solved in a number of projects, but all these things are part of the design project of a better, mixed-use, sustainable, flexible city, which we know nothing about how it will be used in 20 years. We need to imagine how it might be used, and by using our imagination, we might be able to make a place that people will want to use in 20 years. Thank you very much.
If you take that one, forward. Well, wasn't that great? Sort of a tour de force. If you pull forward a bit, everybody around the corner here can see as well.
Yeah, sorry.
Well, we got about, let me have a little look at my thing here, 15 minutes to have a conversation with Simon about what he had to say. I thought I'd kick off, if I may, with just a couple of questions, and while you think about the questions you want to ask. And the first one was, this was a talk about designing or master plans for residential developments, and you said you didn't believe in districts and all the rest of it, which is fine. The only thing you didn't talk about the process was people. And because they're going to live in these things, yes, where should they fit in this process?
We spend our lives talking to people. The engagement on any project is immense. I showed a table and said it is about engaging at the club table.
Yeah.
The interesting tension about this is the ownership people have, they think they have of a project, be it a master plan or a building, and you listen to them. You want to learn, but if you look at the history of schools over the last 30 years, you will see that there is the history of educational trends. Head teachers saying, I want a school with no walls. I want a school with only walls. I want a school that's very bespoke. I want a school that's very specific. And then what you get is redundant buildings. So we spend our lives listening to people in everything we do, and then our role in this big engagement, we are part of a huge team of people working on these projects, is to raise ideas that we think back and share them with people and get their feedback. But the chance of them actually living there are actually very, very limited. And they will have very specific and immediate concerns, actually, which are very valid, often about where the oven is or where the kitchen might be or whatever. They will know what they don't like, which is very, very useful. They won't necessarily know what they like because their experience of their own life may have not been very satisfactory in many ways, particularly in estate regeneration. So people are a fundamental part, but you've got to be wary. We are sort of there to absorb, but not to just kind of tick off a suite of answers, because the danger is we will answer today's problems, not tomorrow's, and create a city that's designed for really people are looking back rather than forward.
Well, let's think about Napoleon III and Paris then. Would it, architecture in that sense, be better off if you actually ignored the people and took the role of a benign dictator and designed the sort of master plan you think is best given the experience you have, and actually just did away with all the chit-chat?
I would be shot dead if I said that.
I know, but it's worth asking,
yes,
isn't
exactly.
it? Yeah.
Napoleon III, his plan was to control people, wasn't it?
It was.
It was to wipe out the slums.
And good sight lines.
Yeah, good sight lines and adequate widths for troops to march down.
That's right.
It's quite interesting now that it's held up as an idealised city, when actually its model of construction was deeply unpleasant.
Yeah, Houseman.
So I think that's an interesting thing, because that's the point about one of the buildings I showed, Politics and Architecture, was by Giuseppe Torelli. He was a big mate of Mussolini's. He designed the Casa del Fascio in Como. He was a committed fascist. Then he flipped, got sent to the Russian front, and committed suicide because he realised everything he believed in was proving to be wrong.
Yeah.
Interestingly enough, after the war, the Casa del Fascio became the Casa del Popolo,
Yes.
the headquarters of the Communist Party, with a supposedly opposite position. But the building was a success because he was a great designer of space. And I think that goes throughout history. Many of the buildings we admire and the places we admire were built by regimes we should be appalled by. And the challenge to our era is, post-war people had a fantastic vision of a brave new world. They were socially committed and conscious people and delivered some of the worst projects known to man. So it's an interesting idea. Social commitment, incredible drive and focus, brave new world, post-war National Health Service, building a better Britain, home for heroes, wipeout. Houseman, screw the people, smash them up, don't even talk to them, cut through their slums, create a city of military control. Tourism, values, pleasure. So there is a danger in this discussion that the worthiness of your discussion gains more import than the success of what you design. So we will always engage with people. I can't design a shopping centre, right, because I don't like them.
No.
If you don't like something, you cannot design it.
No.
You can design something that you know nothing about, because you will learn from people, and you might come with a naivety that's valuable. But you can't design something you're not interested in. I couldn't design a new town because I wouldn't want to live in one. And I think as a designer, it's very difficult to design something where you don't want to be.
You have to care.
You have to care, you have to be interested, and you also have to have the confidence to put forward a vision and have it shot down and iterate back and respond. But if you go into a room and say, what do you want? Then to me, you're back in the world of the generic. We're designing a very flexible new theatre, and one of the challenges of a very flexible new theatre is there's nothing for the director or the actors to react to. And the worst kind of theatres, they react to quite well, because it's a proscenium, and that's it.
Yep.
And they actually quite enjoy the challenge of perversely rethinking it. So as a designer, your life is listening. It is all about problems. Charles Eames said, without problems, there's no design. So it's about listening, but you're not necessarily going to hear the solutions. And you do have to imagine things. But what I believe you should be doing in a place like Silvertown Quays, Newham, or somewhere else, is when we looked at Alconbury Airfield, we were saying, this is a Cold War airfield. There are an extraordinary suite of buildings in history there. In your new place there, build upon that. Don't wipe it away and create a model new community. Build it upon what you find. And if you find nothing at all, it's actually very difficult. It might take, to accelerate the hundreds of years of placemaking that happens. If you're doing it now at speed. I always think you need to build it around something, and that is some history, some infrastructure, and some community.
Great answer. I don't know if any of you thought that the answer to that broadly was yes. Benign dictatorships are the way to design. Anyway, who would like to ask Simon a question? This gentleman here in the white shirt, if somebody can get a microphone to him. Thank you, the lady here is coming. Thank you very much.
Hi, Simon.
Hi.
My question is about the sandwich, the urban sandwich. So you have retail on the ground floor, offices, and then apartments at the top. But you do say that you're not really interested in the shopping centre. So my question is, when you have buildings like this, they kind of isolate themselves, pedestrians on one level, then how you get access to the offices and apartments at the top are on, is different access. But a shopping centre is essentially a multi-level and has the idea of a bit more of a community than these isolated buildings. I'm just wondering, couldn't there be a sort of multi-leveled system where pedestrians are prioritised above cars? Retail can essentially be on any floor, and your office space or apartments can be at street level, top level, and then it's not just this system where retail is always on street level. It can be at the high street, could necessarily be at any level.
I think it's a very interesting observation. That isolated building is on the junction of Soho Street and Oxford Street, so it's not exactly isolated. That is what I call an urban shopping centre, as in it's a street, not a curated place with music playing for it, with weird security guards wandering around and moving you on if you don't fit their model of the people. In Japan, you can get onto the 7th level to a restaurant. In a shopping centre, and I have been engaged in them in a prior life before we set up the office, the idea is people will only come at ground, so you try and make 2 grounds, and only food will get them to the level above that. That is their model, not mine. And people can't turn through 90 degrees. That's why all shopping centres are made of hexagons. So that's the rule of shopping centres. There was a model for London, going back to this 30-year model and building history, where I could walk from Elephant and Castle to the Barbican, which is near our office, where we've worked for 30 years. The Barbican had no front door at street level, because everyone was arriving by car and coming up, or they're arriving by the walkway from Elephant and Castle or elsewhere, and arriving straight. And it was a wonderful, noble vision, because cars were something terrible. It was Buchanan's model, and we built it, and it was a disaster. Because actually, just as cars, natural territory is the street, so are people. Actually getting people up a level. I'd love people to do it. We're building a building with a 7th floor public roof terrace. They will go there, because there aren't many of them, and they will enjoy it, and it will be nice. It's a little piece of city. But the city is ground. The uses, therefore, the most public uses, are so if you want to reinvent the high street, put the schools and those kind of buildings there, where they are public. That's what you want to do in failing high streets. But the city is about activity, and that is about public buildings, and retail or schools are public buildings. The layering I'm interested in, one, I don't care about use, so it could change. It could be, it could be a school housing offices. What I'm saying is financial models precluded any idea of layering. If you go to Marylebone High Street, Gerald Ronson's father, Henry Ronson, was doing it. Retail, living, offices, living. But we got in a model where if you're doing offices, you're doing offices. You can't have the confused investment of an office being a 15-year lease and housing being 125-year leases. We didn't do rented housing, that liberates us. What I'm saying about design in a way is when you're designing a piece of city, you are not free. You've got to look at the history. You've got to listen to people. You've got to think about what they're saying. But also, as a designer, you need to think about funding, because the funding often drives you to a place you don't want to go.
Very good. Next question. This gentleman here, please. Just while that's coming, the high-rise this gentleman describes sounds terribly Ballardian, J.G. Ballard. It just sounds like his novel High-Rise.
Yeah, I mean, look, if you look, I remember when I came to London, the Trellick Tower was hard to let, and it was a kind of washout. And it was actually built fantastically well. It was a socially considered project, and that's also to do with mismanagement. So now it's successful and popular, not because the buildings changed, they have improved the streetscape, and because they haven't dumped people in there. People have chosen to go.
Absolutely.
So choice is incredibly important to people. If you have a choice, then you might have ownership even if you're renting. If you are told where to go, you are being directed by the great forces of which we know not.
And your relationship with the space is very
and everything changes.
Yeah. This gentleman here.
Yeah, hi Simon. I was just first of all, I agree totally with your point that people don't know what they want. They need to be sort of led in a way, which is probably quite controversial. But my question is, I mean, I'm from the north. I'm from Bolton, so you've got places like the Spinning Fields, the Mailbox in Birmingham, and they work very, very well. It's slightly different in London. It's more cramped space, more high-rise, taller buildings, if you will. My interest, the question was, I'm interested in your opinion on, is your idea like a garden to work more with like garden city style projects, the green spaces, intermixed developments, and if so, where does that space come from within such a cramped environment?
I think the garden city space is desired by people. Historically, it's proven. Hampstead Garden Suburb, Welling Garden City, they're all very desirable. And a friend of mine, an architect who's a developer, specialises in that world of good suburban development, which we architects have been quite derogatory about, wrongly. And Span was always successful. I was born in a Span flat. My parents hated the fact that everyone knew everyone and you didn't have any privacy. They didn't like that, and they therefore moved. The garden cities of the future, in my opinion, are in places like Bolton, Margate, Barnsley. They are in cities. Bolton's got a part of the Greater Manchester conurbation, but to me, one of the great successes of the housing crisis in London is that people, and the world that I don't like, the world of excessive communication, is people do not have to live in London. And London, which has absorbed too much talent for too many years, much as I like that, my family came from the north, it has sucked the country dry of talent. Now what is happening is people are making a lifestyle choice to live somewhere else. So if you go to the seaside towns, you will find they're being regenerated by people leaving the city, living in those towns, and then coming in for a day or 2 days. Infrastructure is key to this. There was High Speed 2 earlier. I'm not sure about High Speed 2 because I don't think 15 minutes makes any odds when you look at the traffic queues or the taxi queues. I think broadband on trains would be really critical. But I think the really positive thing, and I'm a huge fan of kind of historical cities, industrial and beyond, is that they should actually not attempt to challenge London. They should actually kind of suck away from it. So we opened an office 8 years ago in Bristol because one guy we liked, we're going to lose him. We said, we can commute in 2 or 3 days a week. We'll open an office in Bristol. There's 50 people living there now because people go, I've had enough of London. I can move to the Bristol office. I can still engage with London. They've got a project in Manchester. They've got one in Bristol. They've got one in Birmingham. They've got one in Sheffield. And so I think that is the communication benefit. What's interesting, though, is they still have to move to places to connect with people face to face. So they can work technologically, we can do Skype and all that, but nothing like that meets the 3 or 4 people in a room talking. But I do think the future of failing or struggling northern cities, former industrial cities, is to look at what they had, what they have, and what distinguishes them, and their connection back to the economic powerhouse that London is and will remain, I think, in the way we are set up as a country. We're still quite a small country. A friend of mine who is a large developer in London, his biggest passion outside of development is Sunderland Football Club. He goes there every weekend from London, but he said to me, Sunderland will never succeed as a town like Newcastle because it only has one train to London, and Newcastle has a daily route. So infrastructure is incredibly important to how a master plan reacts to where it is and what it could be. I think there's a brilliant future for all these cities with wonderful structure, history and housing stock. Much better to rejuvenate bits of Manchester or Barnsley or Bolton than to build a new community somewhere else in the marshes with no hope.
Great. If only all our planners were as passionate and visionary as you, Simon. This gentleman here.
Jeff Beacon from the Pollution Tax Association. I'm shocked at the way the old and the upper middle classes are stealing from the young and the poor through the planning system. I'm also shocked that the eco developments, eco towns we've tried are nowhere near, not within 5 to 1 of what the carbon footprint of the people living there should be, particularly if you include the embodied carbon, which is enormous. I'm so despairing. I'm thinking, well, wasn't plot land development a better idea? Should we not set aside 1 million plots of land, and there's plenty of land around, you know, London may be 51.3 people per hectare, but the rest of the south of East is not even 5 people per hectare. As they say, more built up, less built up land in Surrey than golf courses. Who Peninsula would be a good place to start. So why don't we just mark out 1 million plots of land and ask Legal in General or someone a bit cheaper than them if they can supply kit houses, should the people that own the planning permission want them? Because the problem is that the planning permission is rarely owned by individuals. It's owned by big land banks that slow the process down. So what about plot land development? Like I grew up on, my father bought a plot, built a house on it. Let's have something like that 1 million times over and really cool the housing market and the unfairness that it causes.
Simon.
That's a suite of statements, some of which I agree with and not what I do. I'll just come back with some comments. I don't quite know where you're coming from, but my view is new build is a kind of, it's a tiny amount of what we do. So retrofitting buildings that exist to make them good for use is a much better carbon footprint than taking land to build new elsewhere. You know, I got
Carry on. You just get.
So there will I don't believe the infrastructure we have supports a broad-acre farm with a quarter of an acre. I think you'll end up with an American Oklahoma-like farming community.
Sorry, nobody can hear you. I'm so sorry. Just let Simon answer.
And I think, you know, I don't disagree with you about the challenges of land. You know, someone said they don't make land anymore. The Dutch do. That's one way of dealing with it. But the challenges of land is it is in ownership. So unless you nationalise land, it is a real problem, because it's not the cost of building is nothing. It's the cost of land that's the problem.
Farmers would sell at twice agricultural prices, which is about £1,000 a housing plot.
Yeah, okay. Well,
so £1,000 is nothing compared to the £400,000 people have to pay for their houses.
I think that there is a strong emerging self-build community that is being supported, actually more than ever has been before. But in terms of farmland, to me that could be the most depressing places in the world today are the kind of dead estates relying on cars with no schools, high streets or infrastructure on the edge of all our towns that are farmland, selling them to house builders. The political point about who builds them is interesting, but the reality is the places are appalling.
Okay, well, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. You should have this conversation offline, because sadly we've run out of time. Could you please give Simon Allford a very, very warm round of applause for an excellent talk?
Thank you very much.